Hello everyone, and welcome back to Old Man Stories. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep. So before you doze off, I thought it would be a fun idea if each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from. Also, give a like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. This abandoned room was a warning. An abandoned room inside a municipal building in Topeka, Kansas, was discovered during routine maintenance, yet the conditions unsettled staff because documentation did not match reality. The space appeared sealed and forgotten. However, several indicators suggested continuity rather than neglect, which created tension among those responsible for oversight. That contradiction initiated a careful internal review conducted quietly to prevent speculation while preserving accurate records. Jordan Ellis, age 32, worked as a facilities coordinator responsible for tracking maintenance schedules across several city-owned properties and auxiliary service offices. Renee Calder, age 26, served as an administrative assistant assigned to digitize archive notes and update room inventories for annual compliance reporting. Their shared objective involved confirming that every listed space aligned with dispatch logs and inspection documentation required for external audit. The building housed multiple departments and included storage corridors that had not been actively used since restructuring reduced staff numbers years earlier. State records listed every room as cataloged with assigned purpose following an inspection completed in 2011. Those records did not explain why one door behind a filing corridor lacked identification placard while appearing structurally identical to occupied offices. Jordan noticed the discrepancy while conducting a floor-by-floor walkthrough intended to confirm insurance documentation before renewal review. The door opened without resistance and revealed a compact office containing metal desk, outdated office chair, and wall calendar frozen on the current month. He documented the scene with photographs and noted uncertainty because the corridor electrical circuit was listed as inactive within facilities diagrams. Renee reviewed digital access logs and confirmed that no authorized keycard entries were recorded for that door during the previous 6 months. She located older archived notes referencing temporary use of the room during a records overflow period more than a decade earlier. Records conflict regarding when the room was officially removed from active use because closure documentation appeared incomplete and unsigned within archived files. Jordan inspected the electrical panels serving that hallway and confirmed that breaker labeling indicated no power should reach that outlet according to maintenance diagrams. An electrician later verified that the circuit was receiving low-level current through a secondary line that had not been updated during earlier renovations. Investigators never confirmed whether that configuration resulted from oversight or intentional routing left undocumented during infrastructure upgrades. The desk held a powered digital clock displaying the correct time and a stack of printed schedules dated within the past 2 weeks. Renee verified that the format matched an older template still accessible on a shared archival drive used for historical reference. She documented that any employee with internal access could reproduce the documents without indicating actual occupancy within the room. Jordan requested a review of custodial logs and discovered that cleaning staff had not recorded service to that room for more than a year. Dispatch logs showed no work orders related to the door lock or lighting fixtures within that corridor. Investigators never confirmed whether dust patterns indicated recent presence because airflow from ventilation ducts produced uneven accumulation across similar rooms. A security supervisor reviewed camera footage covering the hallway and reported that the existing camera angle did not directly capture the doorway. He confirmed that adjacent footage showed no unusual movement patterns during the previous month based on available recordings. Records conflict regarding whether camera placement had been modified during past upgrades because older installation diagrams were missing from the equipment file. Renee compiled a packet containing photographs, access logs, archive notes, and infrastructure diagrams for review by the facilities manager. She avoided interpretive language and emphasized that the concern involved documentation inconsistency rather than confirmed misuse or unauthorized access. The manager acknowledged the thoroughness of her work and authorized a broader audit of underutilized spaces across the building. During that audit, several additional rooms were identified with outdated labels and incomplete records, though none displayed similar electrical inconsistencies. The review revealed that prior renovation efforts focused on public-facing areas, while back offices received limited documentation updates. That discovery reframed the abandoned room as evidence of systemic record neglect rather than an isolated anomaly. Jordan coordinated with contractors to update wiring diagrams and verify that all inactive circuits were correctly disconnected according to current safety standards. Renee assisted by updating digital inventories so that every room carried a documented purpose or formal inactive status within the database. Their combined efforts produced a revised compliance report that satisfied external reviewers during the following inspection cycle. Several employees privately described the room as unsettling, even after explanations were provided through internal communication channels. Some stated that the discovery felt like a reminder that oversight can persist unnoticed, while others interpreted it as a warning about complacency. Those reactions appeared in informal conversation rather than in any official documentation submitted for review. Supervisors incorporated the case into training materials for new administrative and facilities staff across multiple departments. The lesson emphasized that undocumented spaces often indicate process failure rather than hidden activity or intentional misuse. Archive notes from that session describe the room as an example of how neglecting documentation can generate fear disproportionate to actual risk. Months later, the facilities department conducted a secondary review to confirm that corrective actions remained effective across the entire property. Updated inventories matched physical walkthroughs, and every corridor displayed clear signage and accurate diagrams approved by supervisors. The building manager noted that the process improved communication between departments that previously worked in isolation. Renee expanded her digitization project to include older microfilm records stored off-site at a county-managed archive facility. She discovered that several historical changes to the building layout were never integrated into modern diagrams used by staff. That finding supported the conclusion that the abandoned room resulted from accumulated administrative gaps rather than recent misuse. Jordan developed a standardized checklist for quarterly walkthroughs and shared it with other facilities coordinators across the city system. The checklist required physical verification of each listed room and cross-referencing with digital records maintained by administrative staff. Supervisors credited that approach with reducing discrepancies across multiple properties within the following year. A regional auditor later cited the building as an example of successful corrective action following documentation failure during a routine compliance visit. The audit report emphasized that the initial concern did not involve misconduct, but rather outdated process and fragmented record keeping. That external validation reinforced the internal understanding of the case and supported continued procedural reforms. Public knowledge of the incident remained limited because leadership chose not to distribute details beyond staff training environments. Some locals claimed they heard rumors about a hidden office within the building, though those stories varied widely in detail. Records conflict regarding how such stories circulated because no official communication mentioned the room outside internal documentation. A union representative later requested clarification on the audit findings during a routine labor meeting. Management provided a summary that emphasized process improvement rather than error attribution to any individual employee. That response reduced tension and reinforced the message that the discovery reflected systemic issues rather than personal failure. Jordan maintained copies of the original photographs within a secured training archive used only for internal education. He noted in accompanying documentation that the images should be interpreted as evidence of record inconsistency rather than indication of unauthorized use. That framing ensured that future reviewers approached the material with caution and analytical distance. Renee continued refining the inventory system by adding automated alerts for rooms lacking recent verification within the database. The system generated monthly reminders that prompted supervisors to confirm physical status during routine walkthroughs. That technological addition further reduced the likelihood that undocumented spaces could persist unnoticed for extended periods. Years later, the once abandoned office now functions as controlled storage with routine inspections logged on a fixed schedule. The room no longer draws attention from staff and blends into the normal rhythm of building operations. The room became a warning not because of what was found inside, but because it demonstrated how easily uncertainty grows when records and reality drift apart. Why this lake reflection terrified investigators. A routine evidence photograph taken at a small lake near Duluth, Minnesota, unsettled investigators because the reflected scene did not align with the shoreline geometry recorded on site maps. The image appeared technically intact and properly exposed, yet analysts could not reconcile spatial relationships within the frame using standard visual interpretation methods. That inconsistency became a documented anomaly that persisted through repeated internal review rather than a dismissed curiosity. Maya Rios, age 31, worked as a county forensic technician responsible for scene documentation and strict evidence handling across rural properties. Eric Halvorsen, age 43, served as a volunteer water rescue coordinator with experience organizing seasonal response teams and compiling detailed dispatch logs. Their shared objective involved preserving accurate documentation because investigators rely heavily on early visual records when physical evidence remains limited. The photograph was captured during a coordinated search for a missing kayaker named Jordan Pike, age 24, who failed to return before sunset after launching from a public access point. His vehicle remained parked with keys inside and his phone left on the passenger seat, which suggested ordinary intent rather than abrupt departure from routine plans. State records show that similar cases often depend on shoreline imagery during the first critical hours of response. Maya used a department-issued camera that embedded time and location metadata automatically and transmitted files to secure storage immediately after capture. Dispatch logs confirm that the image uploaded within 2 minutes of creation, which reduced the likelihood of later modification. Digital integrity checks later verified that the file hash remained unchanged across multiple transfers and storage systems. The photograph depicted calm water with a mirror-like surface that reflected trees and sky with unusual clarity for that time of evening. Analysts noted that the reflected tree line appeared significantly higher than the physical tree line visible behind Maya's position on the shore. Investigators never confirmed whether lens curvature alone could explain the discrepancy because controlled recreations produced inconsistent results across several comparable camera models. Eric coordinated a field recreation the following week using identical equipment and marked positions with survey tape to ensure accuracy. He documented wind speed, temperature, and light levels while participants maintained consistent distances from the waterline. Archived notes from the exercise described partial similarity in reflection behavior, yet no configuration reproduced the pronounced vertical distortion observed in the original image. A county file from 2009 documented dredging activity near the same shoreline after sediment buildup altered boat access. Engineers reportedly adjusted underwater grading during that project, yet records conflict regarding the final contour after contractor revisions were approved. Investigators considered whether subtle underwater slope could influence reflection geometry without being apparent to casual observation above the surface. Weather data from the afternoon showed intermittent temperature inversion conditions across the lake surface, which can affect light refraction over water. A regional meteorologist reviewed the timeline and stated that mirage-like distortion reportedly occurs under specific thermal gradients. Investigators never confirmed whether that effect fully explained the image because comparable conditions during later testing produced weaker distortion. The image also contained a darker band across the reflection that some reviewers initially interpreted as movement within the water column. Pixel analysis later suggested that the band aligned with compression behavior around smooth tonal gradients rather than indicating independent motion. Some locals claim the image suggested something within the lake, though those interpretations appeared only after the photographs circulated on community forums. Maya documented her entire workflow in a supplemental report and included device logs to demonstrate compliance with evidence standards. Eric provided a separate memo summarizing environmental factors using cautious language that emphasized uncertainty rather than implication. External consultants acknowledged that both records reflected careful process while noting that ambiguity remained within the visual outcome. During later review, analysts compared the image against historical shoreline photographs taken during recreational events over the previous decade. Several older images showed minor distortion under similar lighting conditions, yet none displayed the same degree of spatial mismatch between shoreline and reflection. Records conflict regarding whether camera placement differed enough to account for that variation because older metadata was incomplete. Investigators requested assistance from a university optics department that specialized in environmental light behavior. Graduate researchers reviewed the file and suggested that a combination of lens perspective, water smoothness, and atmospheric layering could theoretically create exaggerated vertical displacement. Their simulations produced approximate similarities, but still failed to reproduce the exact proportions seen in the original photograph. Eric organized a second field session months later during comparable seasonal conditions to gather additional reference images. Volunteers documented every variable, including footwear placement, tripod height, and camera angle. Despite extensive documentation, the resulting photographs displayed only mild distortion, which reinforced the perception that the original image remained an outlier rather than a reproducible phenomenon. Maya preserved every version of the file, along with contact sheets and export histories to ensure transparency in later review. She annotated her notes to clarify that the image should not be interpreted as evidence of anything beyond visual inconsistency. Archived notes show that supervisors appreciated her restraint and emphasized the importance of documenting anomalies without assigning meaning. A separate consultant reviewed the lake bathymetry maps and confirmed that the underwater slope changed abruptly near the photographed shoreline. He explained that such transitions can influence how light reflects and refracts across the surface under calm conditions. Investigators never confirmed whether that explanation resolved the issue because the model still required more extreme atmospheric conditions than were documented that day. Public interest increased after a local blogger obtained the image through an open records request and published it with speculative commentary. Community members debated interpretations, while others criticized the lack of definitive explanation. Records conflict within public discussion because technical nuance was simplified into dramatic claims that did not reflect the cautious language used in official reports. The department issued a brief statement emphasizing that the photograph represented an unresolved optical anomaly rather than evidence of unusual activity. Supervisors reiterated that the case focus remained on the missing kayaker and not on interpretation of the image. Dispatch logs confirm that no operational decisions were influenced by the photograph, beyond its use as a documentation example. Months later, the missing person investigation transitioned to long-term review due to the absence of actionable leads. The photograph remained within the file because it represented a documented anomaly encountered during standard procedure. Training materials later referenced the image to demonstrate how perception can challenge even experienced investigators. Maya continued her work in forensic documentation and cited the case when mentoring new technicians about careful observation without speculation. Eric referenced the experience when training volunteers to document environmental conditions thoroughly, even when details seem insignificant. Their shared conclusion focused on process improvement rather than explanation of the unresolved visual detail. Years later, the lake remains accessible to the public and appears unchanged to those who visit regularly. Some locals still reference the photograph when discussing the case, while others view it as an example of how easily images can mislead interpretation. The reflection continues to unsettle investigators, not because it confirms anything unusual, but because available evidence cannot fully explain every element captured within a single frame. The quiet truth about this small-town bridge. The bridge in a rural town near Hannibal, Missouri, appeared unremarkable to passing drivers. Yet, subtle inconsistencies accumulated quietly within municipal records for years. Inspectors described acceptable conditions during routine visits. However, internal files revealed missing measurements and unexplained gaps that complicated long-term evaluation. That contradiction became the reason a low-profile administrative review began without public notice or community discussion. Emily Carter, age 27, worked as a county planning assistant responsible for organizing infrastructure archives during a digitization project funded through a modest state grant. Harold Finch, age 51, served as a volunteer firefighter and part-time public works helper who often assisted with seasonal inspection routines and emergency responses. Their shared goal involved preserving accurate documentation because dispatch logs and state records would guide future maintenance planning and influence eligibility for repair funding. The bridge crossed a narrow river that flooded during heavy storms, but remained calm during most months of the year. County file from 2009 listed the structure as serviceable with recommendations for surface sealing that were reportedly completed during a short maintenance closure. Those records did not explain why later inspection forms contained blank sections where routine measurements were normally recorded according to revised standards. Emily discovered the gaps while scanning paper documents stored in labeled boxes within a small municipal storage room behind the clerk office. Several forms referenced attachments that were no longer present and included signatures that could not be matched to any current employee roster. She documented each inconsistency carefully and emphasized uncertainty within her notes to avoid interpretation that could be perceived as accusation. Harold reviewed the physical structure during early evening hours and reported that deck boards felt stable under ordinary vehicle weight. He observed guardrails showing weathering consistent with age and exposure without indicating immediate structural risk or obvious material failure. His observations aligned with what residents reported during casual conversation at town meetings and local events. Dispatch logs revealed occasional calls reporting loud impact sounds on the bridge during late-night hours over several years. Officers responded to those calls and documented no visible damage or stalled vehicles during each response. Investigators never confirmed whether those sounds resulted from temperature-related expansion or vibration caused by heavy trucks traveling at higher speeds. Emily compared the call history against maintenance schedules and noticed that reports increased during weeks when inspections were postponed due to staffing shortages. She shared that pattern with the county engineer, who requested that future checks include more detailed measurement logging for consistency. Archive notes show that the recommendation was accepted, yet implementation progressed slowly because procedural changes required additional training. A retired maintenance worker named Paul Jennings, age 68, agreed to review the files after learning about the inconsistencies through informal conversation at a community center. He stated that older practices relied heavily on verbal reporting and that documentation standards changed gradually over decades. Records conflict regarding whether specific readings were ever taken because early equipment logs were not preserved beyond required retention periods. The county engineer requested that Emily compile a comprehensive index of every inspection document related to the bridge since 2000. That task required weeks of review because several folders contained overlapping material without consistent labeling or chronological order. Her index revealed that entire seasons lacked documented measurements despite references to completed inspections within summary reports. Harold accompanied the engineer during a scheduled walkthrough and observed that newer inspection tools produced readings that appeared consistent with acceptable thresholds. The engineer noted that physical evidence did not suggest hidden deterioration, yet emphasized that documentation gaps reduced confidence in long-term trend analysis. That assessment reinforced the importance of administrative clarity rather than immediate structural concern. A state review team visited the bridge during a regional audit and conducted independent measurements using updated instruments. Their preliminary report described the structure as functional while emphasizing the need for improved documentation practices across rural jurisdictions. That assessment supported the conclusion that risk perception exceeded measurable deficiency in this particular case. Emily compiled a detailed packet containing scanned reports, dispatch summaries, and her own annotations highlighting areas of uncertainty. She avoided interpretive language and focused on factual discrepancies that could be verified by independent review. Supervisors acknowledged the clarity of her work and approved a revised procedure for future inspections. Harold assisted with implementing the new checklist and trained other volunteers to record measurements consistently using standardized forms. He reported that the process increased confidence because each entry now included clear reference points and reliable timestamps. Residents observed no visible change in the bridge, yet appreciated the increased transparency shared at community meetings. Several months later, a regional newspaper referenced the bridge during a broader article about rural infrastructure challenges across the state. Some locals claimed the attention proved that earlier concerns were justified, while others argued that the structure had always performed reliably. Records conflict within public discussion because technical nuance was simplified during retelling. The county engineer requested a follow-up review during the next fiscal year to confirm that new procedures produced consistent data. That review showed complete documentation across every inspection cycle with no unexplained gaps. The consistency reduced internal concern because trends could now be evaluated using comparable measurements. Emily retained the original scanned files within the county archive and marked them as historical context for future administrative staff. She noted that the quiet issue never involved hidden danger, but rather incomplete records that allowed uncertainty to grow over time. That framing became part of training material for new clerks and planning assistants. Harold continued assisting with inspections and reported that the new structure for documentation improved communication between volunteers and county officials. He observed that questions were resolved more quickly because every entry now included supporting detail. His experience became an example cited during orientation for new public works helpers. A subsequent engineering report confirmed that the bridge met safety thresholds based on consistent measurements collected under the revised protocol. The report credited improved documentation practices for making evaluation more efficient and less ambiguous. No corrective construction was ordered beyond routine maintenance already scheduled within the annual plan. Community perception gradually shifted as the story faded from local conversation and newer issues captured public attention. Some residents still referenced the period of confusion when discussing government transparency, while others barely remembered that any concern existed. The gap between those perspectives illustrated how uncertainty persists longer in memory than resolution. A visiting academic researcher later requested access to the anonymized files while studying documentation practices in small municipalities. She noted that the bridge case demonstrated how administrative weaknesses can mimic structural risk in the absence of clear data. Her observations were included in a journal article that focused on process rather than infrastructure failure. Emily reviewed the article after publication and recognized many elements drawn from her original packet. She appreciated that the case was used to illustrate procedural learning rather than to imply negligence. Supervisors cited the publication when advocating for continued funding of digitization and training programs. Harold reflected on the process during a volunteer appreciation meeting and stated that the experience changed how he viewed routine tasks. He explained that documentation once felt secondary to physical labor, yet the bridge case demonstrated that records can shape outcomes just as powerfully as tools. His comments were recorded in meeting minutes and shared with regional coordinators. Years later, the bridge continues to carry daily traffic without incident and remains unremarkable to those who cross it regularly. Some locals still reference the period of uncertainty, while others never became aware that any administrative concern existed. The quiet truth remains that the issue centered on incomplete documentation rather than on hidden structural danger. This photo from a mountain cabin still confuses investigators. A single photograph recovered from a mountain cabin near Flagstaff, Arizona, appeared ordinary at first glance, yet analysts struggled to reconcile details visible within the frame. Investigators described the image as technically intact. However, the surrounding context for its creation remained inconsistent across official documentation. That contradiction became the foundation for an extended review process that relied more on archived notes than on physical discovery. Rachel Kim, age 28, worked as a seasonal forestry technician, assigned to document storm impact across remote properties managed by the county land office. David Henson, age 35, served as a volunteer search coordinator with prior experience in wilderness first response and incident documentation. Their shared purpose involved preserving accurate evidence because dispatch logs and archived notes would determine how the emerging timeline was interpreted during later evaluation. The cabin belonged to a retired surveyor named Glenn Porter, age 63, who used the structure for occasional weekend stays during spring and early summer months. Family members reported him overdue after he failed to respond to scheduled check-ins following a planned 3-day visit. His vehicle remained parked at the turnout below the access road, which suggested that arrival occurred according to his stated plan. County deputies entered the cabin after obtaining consent from family members and documented that the interior appeared orderly with no visible signs of forced entry. A kettle rested cold on the stove, and packaged food supplies showed no evidence of spoilage beyond expected timeframes for an unoccupied structure. State records later confirmed that the property had no history of reported incidents beyond minor weather-related damage over several decades. Rachel was assigned to photograph structural conditions for an insurance assessment and used a department-issued camera that embedded time and location data automatically. She captured wide shots of windows, flooring, and roof joints before photographing smaller details near the writing desk and shelving. One image showed a reflection in the opposite wall mirror that did not align with the visible arrangement of objects in the room. Investigators initially suspected a technical artifact and requested that Rachel provide the original file without compression or resizing. Digital analysts reviewed metadata and confirmed that the file had not been altered after capture, according to integrity verification tools. Dispatch logs confirm that Rachel transmitted the image within minutes of creation, which reduced the likelihood of later modification. The photograph depicted the cabin interior with the desk lamp illuminated, yet the mirror reflection suggested the lamp was unlit during capture. Analysts noted that shadows on the wall appeared inconsistent with the single overhead fixture that was visible within the frame. Investigators never confirmed whether multiple light sources could explain the discrepancy because subsequent testing produced variable outcomes. David coordinated a controlled recreation using identical equipment to evaluate whether lens angle or shutter behavior could produce similar effects under repeatable conditions. He documented each step using standardized forms and ensured that Rachel replicated her original position and posture as closely as possible. Archived notes from the exercise described partial similarities, however, no configuration reproduced the exact alignment observed in the original photograph. A county file from 2009 documented electrical irregularities at the property that required rewiring after lightning damage during a seasonal storm. Contractors reportedly replaced most fixtures, yet records conflict regarding whether all circuits were upgraded during that earlier repair. Investigators considered whether intermittent power fluctuation could affect exposure and reflection without indicating any external interference. Weather data for the day showed heavy cloud cover and intermittent gusts that influenced ambient light entering through the small windows. Rachel documented that curtains were partially closed to reduce glare, while she completed her photographic survey inside the cabin. Analysts tested whether shifting exterior light could account for the conflicting shadows. However, modeling did not fully resolve the pattern. The image also contained a faint shape near the doorway that some reviewers interpreted as motion blur caused by slight camera movement. Technical staff measured pixel distortion and concluded that the pattern matched camera shake rather than independent subject motion. Some locals claimed the image suggested a presence within the cabin, though those interpretations emerged only after the photo circulated through community forums. Investigators reviewed Glenn's recent communications and found no indication of distress within his messages or scheduling notes. Reportedly, he planned to complete minor repairs and return home before the next storm system reached higher elevations. Search teams later expanded efforts across nearby trails, yet no conclusive evidence explained his absence within the surrounding terrain. Rachel provided a sworn statement describing her actions and confirmed that she heard no unusual sounds during the inspection process. David submitted his documentation packet with emphasis on uncertainty and avoided interpretive language that could bias later review by external parties. External consultants acknowledged the thoroughness of their process, while noting that technical ambiguity remained unresolved. A laboratory specializing in digital imaging reviewed the file months later and confirmed that compression artifacts did not account for the inconsistency. Their report suggested that overlapping light sources or reflective surfaces could create complex visual effects under specific conditions. Investigators never confirmed a definitive cause because recreations produced only partial alignment with the original data. Further review revealed that the cabin mirror originated from an older renovation and contained slight warping, visible only when examined under angled lighting. Technicians measured the glass surface and confirmed subtle curvature that could distort reflections depending on camera position. Records conflict regarding when the mirror was installed because receipts from earlier property maintenance were incomplete and poorly cataloged. Rachel returned to the cabin weeks later with permission to document the mirror under controlled lighting conditions for additional comparison testing. She photographed the room at varying times of day and adjusted shutter settings according to guidance provided by imaging consultants. Those additional files demonstrated distortion under certain conditions, yet still failed to replicate the exact visual relationship captured in the original image. David reviewed building orientation and confirmed that the cabin faced a direction where reflected sky brightness could fluctuate rapidly during moving cloud cover. He documented that effect using time-stamped notes and compared them against regional weather station data. That comparison suggested plausible environmental contribution. However, investigators never confirmed whether that explanation fully resolved the inconsistencies. A second consultant reviewed the metadata and confirmed that the camera clock aligned with network time when the file was transmitted. That finding reduced concern regarding timeline error, but did not address the unresolved visual elements within the frame. Archived notes reflect that reviewers agreed on process reliability while acknowledging uncertainty regarding outcome. Supervisors preserved the photograph within the official case file alongside dispatch logs, state records, and written statements from all personnel involved. They instructed that no interpretive conclusions should accompany the image when used for training or documentation. The goal involved preserving the ambiguity as a learning tool rather than presenting the photograph as evidence of any specific conclusion. Years later, the image continues to circulate quietly among investigators and analysts because it demonstrates how a single unresolved detail can persist despite careful procedure. Some locals claim the photograph proves something unusual, while others accepted that technical explanations remain incomplete. The image remains confusing not because it confirms anything, but because available evidence cannot fully explain every element contained within the frame. No clue in this forest trail? One detail remained. Search teams described the forest trail outside Eugene, Oregon as ordinary terrain, yet the absence of physical evidence created lasting unease among those assigned. Initial briefings emphasized methodical procedure. However, the consistent lack of usable clues forced investigators to rely on documentation rather than discovery. Lena Harper, age 26, worked as a seasonal ranger while completing environmental science requirements and seeking permanent placement within the state parks department. Marcus Bell, age 38, served as a volunteer search coordinator and previously worked as an emergency medical technician within a regional ambulance service. Their shared objective involved preserving accurate records because dispatch logs and archive notes would determine how resources were allocated during extended operations. The missing person report concerned Evan Cole, age 21, who planned a solo afternoon hike and told friends he would return before sunset. His vehicle remained parked at the primary trailhead with no visible disturbance, which suggested that initial travel proceeded according to plan. State records show that similar disappearances in the region typically produced scattered evidence within the first 24 hours. Early search efforts focused on established routes where foot traffic usually leaves traceable impressions across soft soil and leaf litter. Teams deployed structured tracking techniques that included grid walking and photographic documentation to preserve potential evidence for later comparison. Investigators never confirmed whether early rainfall altered the ground because weather station data showed light precipitation, while some volunteers recalled dry conditions. Lena documented each segment of the trail using a handheld device that recorded time and location for every observation she logged. Her notes described fallen branches and seasonal debris that appeared consistent with ordinary use rather than sudden disruption. Archived notes from prior seasons described similar conditions, which reduced confidence that environmental anomalies explained the absence of clues. Marcus coordinated radio check-ins and ensured that each team reported negative findings using consistent language to avoid confusion during later review. Dispatch logs show that every unit complied with scheduled reporting, which supported the conclusion that coverage remained thorough across assigned zones. Records conflict regarding whether one unit arrived late to its sector because timestamps varied between personal devices and official logs. On the second day, investigators expanded the perimeter beyond the main trail system to include secondary paths used primarily by local hikers. Volunteers documented steep terrain and dense undergrowth that complicated movement and reduced visibility for searchers. Some locals claimed the area contained unmarked routes, while a county file from 2009 listed only approved paths within the managed boundary. A canine unit arrived and conducted sweeps near the trailhead and along the first mile of established route. Handlers reported inconsistent tracking behavior and noted that scent acquisition remained weak despite repeated attempts along the same corridor. Investigators never confirmed whether contamination from heavy foot traffic interfered with the process because baseline conditions were not documented before the search began. Lena reviewed Evan's digital footprint at the request of supervisors and confirmed that his recent messages suggested ordinary planning rather than distress. She provided that summary to the incident lead and emphasized uncertainty within her documentation to avoid interpretation. Archive notes preserved her wording, which later became important when external reviewers evaluated the timeline for decision-making. On the fourth day, Marcus noticed that one segment of trail produced fewer volunteer reports than adjacent areas despite similar assignment coverage. He reviewed dispatch logs and confirmed that teams reported presence, yet their written observations contained fewer environmental details. That discrepancy prompted a focused review of the segment rather than immediate reclassification of the area. During a subsequent walkthrough, Lena identified a small section where trail markers appeared subtly misaligned compared with standard placement practices used throughout the park. The difference remained slight and could have resulted from routine maintenance inconsistency rather than deliberate alteration. Investigators never confirmed whether the alignment influenced navigation because visitors reported successful travel through the area before and after the incident. Marcus requested that survey staff measure spacing and orientation of markers along the corridor to establish whether deviation existed. The resulting data showed minor variance across several locations, which suggested inconsistency rather than targeted change. Records conflict regarding when the last maintenance occurred because work orders were logged under a general category without site-specific timestamps. As the search extended into the second week, supervisors requested that every team submit expanded narrative reports rather than brief checklists. Lena reviewed those narratives and observed that descriptions of sound carried farther in that corridor compared with other sections of the trail. Several volunteers noted that voices seemed closer than expected, while radio transmissions occasionally sounded distorted within the same area. Marcus cross-referenced those reports with equipment logs and confirmed that multiple radios required battery replacement sooner than expected during assignments near that segment. Technicians later explained that dense terrain and moisture can reduce battery performance without indicating equipment failure. Investigators never confirmed whether those conditions influenced perception because similar terrain elsewhere did not produce identical reporting patterns. A geologist consulted during the operation reviewed maps and explained that shallow rock formations beneath the trail could reflect vibration in unusual ways. That explanation aligned with some volunteer descriptions of sound direction shifting unpredictably during patrol. Records conflict regarding whether that geological feature was mapped previously because older park surveys lacked sufficient resolution for precise analysis. Supervisors authorized additional documentation and requested that teams record ambient conditions during each pass through the corridor. Lena complied by noting temperature, humidity, and approximate wind conditions using portable instruments assigned to her unit. Her logs showed modest variation across the day and did not clearly correlate with changes in perception reported by other volunteers. During a later review, Marcus noticed that one older marker near the segment displayed faded numbering that differed from the current system used throughout the rest of the park. He documented the marker and submitted the image with his report because the numbering style appeared consistent with older archived photographs. A county file from 2009 referenced a short-lived marker system that was replaced after visitor feedback about confusion. Lena compared the photograph against archive notes stored within the ranger office and confirmed that the style matched markers retired more than a decade earlier. Investigators never confirmed when the marker was last inspected because routine checks documented only total counts rather than individual identifiers. That detail became the only verified inconsistency supported by physical documentation rather than perception. Supervisors instructed maintenance staff to replace the outdated marker and document all remaining identifiers along the trail system. The resulting audit identified 2 additional markers with faded numbering, though both were positioned outside the primary search corridor. Records conflict regarding whether those markers contributed to navigation error because hikers reported successful travel through those areas without confusion. Despite the extended effort, no conclusive evidence explained, Evan's disappearance and the case eventually transitioned from active search to long-term review. Lena submitted a final report that emphasized the importance of consistent marker audits and detailed baseline documentation for future incidents. Her recommendations were accepted and incorporated into updated guidance distributed across regional ranger teams. Years later, the trail remains open and the case remains referenced during training because it illustrates how the absence of clues can challenge professional confidence. Some locals claimed the unresolved nature of the incident reflects deeper risk, while others described the area as unchanged and familiar. The single remaining detail became a lesson in process rather than proof, reminding investigators that uncertainty demands structure rather than assumption. These night guard reports were almost lost. Security reports from a distribution facility near Dayton, Ohio, were nearly erased during routine data cleanup, yet several irregular entries prompted careful preservation by administrative staff. Supervisors initially described the reports as mundane. However, timing discrepancies and conflicting system logs created questions that documentation alone could not immediately resolve. Caleb Morris, age 33, worked overnight security after leaving warehouse operations and seeking predictable hours while completing coursework in information systems. Janelle Price, age 28, managed records for the contractor and maintained archived notes that supported compliance reviews and client audits. Their shared purpose involved preserving accurate documentation because dispatch logs and incident summaries directly affected contract renewals and internal evaluations. The facility processed retail returns and operated continuously with conveyor systems that produced steady mechanical noise throughout most areas of the building. State records listed the site as compliant following inspections in 2011, with lighting improvements reportedly completed shortly afterward. A county file from 2009 documented ownership transitions and noted inconsistent documentation practices before the current contractor assumed operational responsibility. During a scheduled migration of digital storage, Janelle discovered that several weeks of night reports were missing from the primary supervisor folder. She located a secondary directory labeled Legacy that contained fragmented files saved under inconsistent names and unverified timestamps. Those recovered entries included references to unexplained delays and repeated attempts to confirm status through radio communication that never appeared in official dispatch logs. Caleb reports described motion alerts near loading bay 3 that resolved before camera buffering completed upload to the internal server. He recorded that badge swipe data reflected entry times that did not correspond with patrol timestamps recorded on his handheld reporting device. Investigators never confirmed whether clock drift caused the discrepancies because later testing produced stable synchronization after firmware updates. One entry documented a prolonged interval of radio silence while Caleb stood within view of a fixed camera that showed no visible obstruction. Dispatch logs show he attempted 3 check-ins during that period, although supervisors later received only fragmented transmissions. Some locals claimed the building suffered from communication dead zones, while technicians documented consistent signal strength during scheduled daytime surveys. Janelle compared report timestamps against access control exports and identified clusters of anomalies that repeated during specific overnight shifts. She escalated the pattern to the regional manager, who instructed that all original files be preserved pending review. Archived notes attached to the files contained short objective observations written in calm language that contrasted with the implications suggested by the timing inconsistencies. One report stated that a conveyor section stopped without command, while indicator lights continued showing normal operation for several minutes. Another entry noted that a secured door sensor toggled repeatedly despite physical inspection, confirming the door remained closed throughout the interval. Records conflict regarding whether maintenance occurred during that week because invoices were delayed and internal work orders lacked consistent documentation. The regional manager authorized a limited internal review and instructed staff that no digital material should be altered until retention obligations were clarified. Caleb continued working overnight shifts and agreed to wear an additional body camera supplied by the contractor for transparency. The footage showed routine patrol behavior and captured intermittent device alerts that aligned with low battery indicators rather than environmental activity. A subsequent data export preserved the recovered files and revealed that several anomalies coincided with power quality fluctuations recorded by the building management system. Engineers reportedly advised that voltage instability can disrupt clocks, sensors, and recording devices, which may generate conflicting entries across independent platforms. Investigators never confirmed the full impact of those fluctuations because baseline monitoring had not been implemented before the inconsistencies occurred. Janelle compiled a comprehensive packet containing dispatch logs, access reports, video stills, and archive notes for external compliance review. She emphasized uncertainty throughout her summary and avoided speculative language that could bias interpretation by reviewers. Compliance officers later acknowledged the clarity of the documentation and requested extended retention while comparing similar data from other contracted facilities. Several additional entries described minor irregularities that appeared insignificant individually, yet formed patterns when reviewed collectively over longer periods. Caleb documented instances where motion sensors activated without corresponding visual confirmation and where system clocks required manual correction. Those observations remained descriptive and did not include interpretation, which preserved the objective tone expected within professional reporting standards. Further review identified that older firmware within several monitoring devices lacked automatic synchronization features and relied on manual updates. A contractor later confirmed that inconsistent updates could gradually produce timestamp divergence across interconnected systems. That finding aligned with archived notes, indicating that equipment upgrades had been postponed during earlier budget constraints. Janelle interviewed former supervisors whose recollections varied regarding when those devices were last serviced or recalibrated. Some stated that informal adjustments were made during routine patrols, while others believed that only certified technicians performed modifications. Records conflict regarding those practices because prior documentation lacked consistent procedural detail and approval signatures. The contractor implemented system-wide updates that included synchronized time servers, improved radio equipment, and revised reporting templates. Training materials were distributed to all guards, emphasizing the importance of documenting technical irregularities without interpretation. Caleb reported that the updated systems reduced the number of anomalies and made his nightly reports easier to complete accurately. During a follow-up review, months later, external auditors confirmed that reporting consistency had improved across multiple facilities operated by the same contractor. They cited the preserved files as a valuable case study, demonstrating how minor technical issues can escalate when documentation lacks clarity. Janelle efforts were referenced in internal training sessions as an example of effective record stewardship. Community discussion emerged after a former employee referenced the situation online without context and invited speculation from readers unfamiliar with documentation procedures. Some locals claimed the facility concealed serious incidents, while others pointed to the published updates and accepted the technical explanations. Records conflict within public retellings because simplified narratives replaced the cautious language originally used within official documentation. Several journalists requested comment after the discussion gained attention on regional forums, yet the contractor declined to elaborate beyond confirmed procedural updates. The company issued a brief statement emphasizing transparency and noting that internal improvements were implemented following routine quality assurance review. That response aligned with standard corporate practice and avoided assigning meaning to unresolved discrepancies within legacy records. The preserved files later became part of a broader training initiative that addressed digital retention and audit readiness across contracted security teams. Supervisors used the case to illustrate how near deletion of records can obscure accountability and limit opportunities for corrective action. Caleb participated in those sessions and described his experience as evidence that thorough documentation protects workers as well as clients. Years later, the archived reports remain stored within the contractor compliance system and are referenced periodically during internal audits. Janelle advanced into a regional compliance role and continued emphasizing careful preservation of primary source material. The reports were almost lost through routine cleanup, yet their survival ultimately improved procedures and clarified the limits of automated systems. The most unsettling cases from a roadside motel. A quiet roadside motel outside Yuma, Arizona appeared forgettable to travelers, yet internal reports suggested patterns that employees struggled to explain. Guests described discomfort and confusion, while desk logs described ordinary activity with routine check-ins and unremarkable departures. Renee Alvarez, age 29, managed the front desk while balancing tuition payments and frequent overnight shifts that disrupted her sleep schedule. Thomas Reed, age 42, handled maintenance duties after leaving warehouse supervision because he wanted more predictable daytime responsibilities. Their shared goal involved stabilizing operations after turnover, created inconsistent procedures and incomplete documentation that weakened accountability. The motel served contractors, seasonal workers, and long-distance drivers who preferred ground floor parking and flexible weekly rates. Archived notes stored in a dented filing drawer described disagreements about billing errors and missing towels without any trend suggesting criminal activity. A county file from 2009 referenced inspection visits that listed minor electrical issues and ventilation recommendations that were reportedly addressed. Those documents did not explain why dispatch logs showed occasional welfare checks requested by guests who claimed the office phone would not answer. Renee created a new incident ledger because previous notebooks contained vague entries that failed to include times or room numbers. She required each complaint to include identification details and encouraged staff to document even minor concerns to establish consistent baselines. Thomas supported the change and began photographing damaged fixtures because he believed visual evidence would protect staff if disputes escalated. Investigators later reviewed those materials and described them as unusually thorough compared with records from similar properties. A truck driver named Mark Holloway, age 36, checked into room 12 and requested ground floor placement because long shifts aggravated chronic back pain. He paid cash and provided identification, which Renee copied using the office scanner according to policy implemented earlier that week. Reportedly, he returned within an hour, stating the room felt recently occupied because curtains were drawn and the shower tiles remained warm. Renee verified the vacancy on the system and accompanied him to the door where air felt cool and no personal items were visible. Renee documented the concern and offered another room, which Mark accepted without complaint. Thomas inspected room 12 the next morning and found no signs of entry, though the bathroom fan activated intermittently without manual input. State records later reviewed by an insurer explained that older ventilation units can cycle automatically based on humidity sensors even without human presence. Records conflict about whether the fan was running when Thomas entered because his maintenance log referenced delayed activation. Another incident involved Kendra Wu, age 27, who worked as a traveling sales associate covering rural territories across southern Arizona. She stayed 3 nights and requested late checkout on her final morning because client meetings ended later than expected. She left a voicemail stating that someone knocked on her door at dawn and spoke her name with familiarity. Renee replayed the message and heard only static with faint rhythmic distortion that technicians later attributed to compression artifacts. Thomas reviewed corridor footage covering her door during the reported time window and observed no visible movement in the hallway. The camera system stored files locally and occasionally skipped frames when power dipped during high air conditioner usage. Dispatch logs show no emergency calls from the property that morning, which supported Renee's statement that the shift remained routine. Investigators never confirmed whether the anomaly reflected environmental interference or limitations of aging recording equipment. Tension increased during a summer heat wave when a stranded family checked in after their vehicle overheated along the shoulder. Javier Morales, age 31, traveled with his partner Anna, age 28, and their daughter Sofia, age 6, while waiting for roadside assistance. They occupied room 7 and requested extra water and towels, which Renee delivered personally to verify conditions. Javier later reported that someone attempted to enter the room using a key that partially engaged the lock before stopping. Renee accessed electronic logs and found no duplicate entries issued for room 7 after check-in. Thomas tested the locking mechanism and noted that the strike plate could misalign when humidity caused the door to expand slightly. A county file from 2009 described a similar issue at a nearby property that was resolved with upgraded hardware. The owner approved replacements shortly afterward, though the timing overlapped with the end of peak travel season, which complicated interpretation. Renee noticed that many reports clustered around rooms near the vending area, which produced constant vibration during compressor cycles. She requested professional evaluation and provided copies of archived notes and dispatch logs to a regional safety consultant. The consultant determined that sound traveled unusually through wall cavities left from earlier renovation work. That finding explained how voices from the parking lot could appear to originate inside rooms without implying unauthorized presence. Further testing revealed that corridor lighting emitted low-frequency electrical hum that interfered with older smoke detectors and created unpredictable clicking sounds. When guests operated fans, air conditioners, and televisions simultaneously, the combined vibration reportedly produced rhythmic knocking effects. Those explanations aligned with guidance documented in state records for similar roadside properties constructed during the same period. Records conflict only on whether previous owners attempted mitigation because invoices and receipts were missing from financial archives. Renee introduced clearer reporting protocols and placed signage encouraging guests to report irregularities immediately instead of after departure. Thomas trained new hires to photograph door frames and lock plates whenever maintenance occurred to preserve verifiable records. The owner invested in upgraded camera equipment with cloud backups, which reduced skipped frames and improved staff confidence. Online reviews stabilized after these changes, which suggested that transparency reduced anxiety among cautious travelers. Several months later, a retired teacher named Alan Brooks, age 62, stayed for 2 nights while visiting family in nearby suburbs. He reported difficulty sleeping because intermittent tapping sounds continued even when his television and air conditioner were turned off. Thomas inspected the exterior and identified loose gutter brackets that shifted during temperature changes and transmitted vibration through the structure. Repairs were completed the next afternoon, and Allen later acknowledged the improvement before checking out. An additional report involved a rideshare driver named Celeste Moreno, age 24, who used the motel during overnight shifts for short rest breaks. She reported that her keycard occasionally failed to open the door despite system logs showing correct authorization. Renee verified the encoding device and documented that the magnetic strip reader intermittently malfunctioned during high humidity periods. Technicians later confirmed the defect and replaced the device, which resolved the access errors. A regional contractor reviewed accumulated documentation and concluded that the majority of unsettling experiences resulted from infrastructure aging rather than deliberate misconduct. He praised the consistency of Renee Ledger and cited her documentation practices as a model for small hospitality businesses. That evaluation was shared with ownership and referenced in future training materials used during staff orientation. The process demonstrated how structured reporting can transform uncertainty into manageable operational improvement. Years later, the motel remains operational, and the incident ledger continues to be maintained with discipline. Some locals claimed the property still carried an uncomfortable atmosphere, while others described it as ordinary and practical for overnight travelers. Dispatch logs in recent years reflect minimal service calls, which supports the conclusion that environmental corrections reduced confusion. The cases endure primarily because fragmented records once allowed imagination to fill gaps left by incomplete technical understanding. Never enter this church basement alone. The basement door at a small church in Spokane, Washington, remained locked after closing hours, yet volunteers reported noises during inventory work. Those reports appeared routine until a weekday afternoon incident forced staff to call dispatch after a volunteer failed to answer radio checks. Mariah Collins, age 27, coordinated weekend volunteers at the church and tracked donated supplies while completing coursework for a community college. Daniel Ortiz, age 34, worked as a HVAC technician and agreed to inspect damp odors reported near rooms beneath the sanctuary. Both arrived on a Tuesday afternoon because the building manager wanted documentation for insurance questions raised by earlier water damage claims. Their stated goal involved photographing conditions and logging measurements that could support repairs requested through a small preservation grant program. Church maintenance records indicated previous flooding episodes and mold remediation efforts that reportedly occurred after heavy spring storms several years earlier. Archived notes stored in a filing cabinet described warped door frames and intermittent electrical faults that volunteers documented during walkthroughs before reopening events. State records reviewed later by an insurance adjuster suggested the property underwent inspections in 2011 with recommendations that were implemented. Those documents did not mention the narrow storage corridor where Daniel planned to test airflow while Mariah photographed labeling on donation bins. They entered through a side stairwell that required portable lighting because overhead fixtures flickered and failed to illuminate corners consistently. Dispatch logs later showed no emergency traffic for the building during that hour, which supported the manager's belief that conditions were manageable. Daniel carried a handheld anemometer, while Mariah held a digital camera and clipboard provided by the church office for documentation. The plan involved moving slowly room by room with periodic check-ins using inexpensive radios purchased for volunteer coordination. According to Mariah's later statement, she noticed a chemical odor that grew stronger near a locked utility closet at the far end. Daniel reportedly suggested opening the closet to verify airflow obstruction while emphasizing that any action should be documented for accountability. Mariah attempted to contact the building manager for permission, but the call failed and the radio produced only static responses. Records conflict regarding whether the closet lock showed tampering before entry, which later complicated efforts to reconstruct the sequence of events. Daniel used a small screwdriver to disengage the simple latch, while Mariah stood several steps back and continued recording video. The door opened to reveal stacked folding chairs and a portable dehumidifier connected to an extension cord that ran through the corridor. Mariah's camera captured a brief audio spike that investigators later described as mechanical feedback rather than evidence of human movement. Some locals claimed afterward that the sound resembled whispering, though those accounts appeared only after rumors circulated on neighborhood social media groups. At approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, Daniel radioed that he felt lightheaded and requested a brief pause near the stairwell. Mariah responded immediately and began walking toward him while narrating her observations in a calm voice for the ongoing recording. Her video shows Daniel leaning against the wall with visible perspiration and slowed speech while insisting that the building air felt heavy. Investigators never confirmed whether environmental exposure contributed to his condition, because later testing produced inconsistent readings across multiple sampling attempts. Mariah suggested ending the inspection and guiding Daniel upstairs, which aligned with volunteer safety guidance described in archived notes. As they moved toward the stairwell, the radio activated unexpectedly and broadcast bursts of feedback that obscured their attempts to coordinate movement. Dispatch logs show a single unanswered call attempt from the church landline during that minute, which later prompted questions about connectivity, reliability. The camera recording ended abruptly when Mariah's battery indicator flashed low and the device powered down near the bottom of the stairs. The building manager arrived within 20 minutes after a neighbor reported the side door standing open during school dismissal traffic. He found Daniel seated on the stair landing and Mariah attempting to fan him with a clipboard while speaking softly. Emergency medical technicians evaluated Daniel on site and determined that transport was unnecessary based on stable vitals and improving symptoms. A brief incident report was completed for church records and forwarded to the insurer, which later became part of a documentation packet. During a subsequent review, an adjuster referenced a county file from 2009 that mentioned unauthorized storage by a former tenant. That file described disposal of solvents and cleaning agents under supervision, though investigators never confirmed whether residues persisted within wall cavities. Records conflict about the timing of those activities because church leadership changed hands several times, and older documentation was reportedly misplaced. Mariah provided her partial video and written notes to the insurer, which later circulated among contractors evaluating remediation options. Daniel scheduled a follow-up appointment with his primary care physician, who documented dehydration and recommended rest after reviewing the incident timeline. He returned to work the next week and reported no ongoing symptoms, which influenced the insurer decision to close the medical portion. Mariah continued volunteering, but requested that future inspections include professional monitors and clearer procedures for communication during basement activities. Her request was added to the safety plan and approved by the board during a routine meeting held the following month. Despite the administrative resolution, the incident attracted attention after a volunteer mentioned the event to friends who shared speculation online. Some posts implied hidden dangers, while others repeated exaggerated details that were not supported by dispatch logs or contemporaneous documentation. The church issued a short statement emphasizing transparency and sharing that independent testing would occur before any future use of the basement. Local coverage summarized the event cautiously and noted that investigators never confirmed wrongdoing while acknowledging that records conflict complicated interpretation. Contractors performed air sampling and surface swabs across multiple rooms and reported that results varied depending on location and ventilation conditions. A follow-up assessment recommended sealing gaps around ductwork and replacing the aging dehumidifier to improve circulation throughout the lower level. Those recommendations aligned with guidance found in state records for similar facilities experiencing moisture intrusion and intermittent electrical issues. Work orders were approved and scheduled over several weekends, which limited disruption to programs and allowed volunteers to observe safer practices. By late summer, the basement reopened for supervised use, and signage outlined new procedures for entry monitoring and communication responsibilities. Mariah assisted with training sessions and demonstrated how to document conditions using standardized forms that improved consistency across volunteer teams. Daniel declined further basement work, but occasionally visited the site and spoke with contractors about airflow improvements based on his professional experience. Their cooperation became an example cited by the manager when discussing risk reduction during orientation for new volunteers and visiting community partners. Years later, the incident persists in conversations because details remain incomplete and because human memory reshapes events when documentation appears fragmented. Archived notes preserve practical lessons, while dispatch logs anchor the timeline, which limits how far speculation can extend beyond verified facts. Some locals claimed the building changed after renovations, while others observed no difference, which underscores how perception diverges from measurable outcomes. The church continues its work with quiet consistency, and the basement remains accessible under procedures designed to prevent uncertainty from overshadowing service. The strange truth about this hospital wing. Staff at a mid-sized hospital in northern Illinois quietly avoided one hallway, although official maps still listed it as active. They never claimed anything supernatural, only that records surrounding the wing never seemed to agree. New employees usually learned the pattern by noticing how often supervisors redirected patients elsewhere. No one explained why, in full. The hospital sat outside Rockford, Illinois, serving several surrounding rural counties with trauma and long-term care services. Its East Wing was added in the 1980s to expand recovery capacity after a regional population increase. State records described it as operational, yet archived notes listed multiple unexplained closures. County file from 2009 referenced administrative inconsistencies without further clarification. Nora Feldman was 32, a respiratory therapist assigned rotating night shifts across all patient floors. Her goal was simple: gain experience, maintain stability, and transfer closer to family within 2 years. Nora followed protocols carefully and rarely questioned departmental decisions. Her dispatch logs later placed her repeatedly near the East Wing nursing station. Jacob Reed was 41, a hospital maintenance supervisor responsible for infrastructure inspections and safety compliance. He focused on electrical systems, ventilation flow, and structural vibration reports. Jacob trusted documentation more than rumors, yet he often noticed mismatched dates on repair tickets. He kept copies of those tickets inside a personal folder. The third individual was Clara Jennings, 26, a medical records assistant tasked with digital archiving. Her responsibility involved transferring paper charts into long-term electronic storage. Clara spent hours reviewing admissions, discharges, and interdepartmental transfers. She began noticing repeated gaps in East Wing patient files. Official floor plans showed the East Wing contained 12 recovery rooms, 1 supply station, and a physical therapy area. However, modern patient databases listed only 7 rooms as active. Investigators later noted that historical updates never explained the reduction. Records conflict about when the other rooms were removed from use. Nora first realized something felt wrong when she attempted to deliver oxygen equipment to room 12. The hallway lighting dimmed gradually, despite full power indicators on the panel. Her access badge opened the door, yet the room inside was completely empty. She reported the condition to her supervisor, who reportedly advised her to move on. Jacob inspected the same room the following morning and found nothing structurally unusual. Ventilation worked, outlets were active, and walls showed no sign of water damage. Yet his work order system listed the room as permanently offline. He could not find any authorization explaining that status. Clara later searched for patient records associated with that room number. The database returned several partial files, all missing discharge summaries. Some entries ended abruptly, while others redirected to unrelated departments. Clara flagged the inconsistencies for later review. Hospital administrators reportedly attributed the irregularities to early digital conversion errors. They stated older paper files had been lost during prior renovations. Archive notes from 2011, however, suggested multiple audits had already addressed that claim. No formal correction followed those audits. Nora continued passing the hallway during night rounds and noticed temperature changes near the closed rooms. Her equipment sometimes showed lower readings only within that section. She recalibrated devices repeatedly, yet the pattern remained. Nora recorded the data without attaching personal interpretation. Jacob later discovered that the East Wing's power usage did not match the number of active rooms. Energy logs indicated ongoing electrical consumption from areas officially marked unused. He reported the discrepancy to facility management, who reportedly categorized it as minor variance. No follow-up inspection was scheduled. Clara found a patient admission file dated 2014 that referenced physical therapy sessions in room 10. According to current maps, that room no longer existed. The therapist's signature appeared legitimate, yet the department denied recent use of the space. Clara saved a copy of the record. Some locals claimed the East Wing had once been a temporary isolation area during a regional outbreak. Others insisted it served as overflow for critical care during winter emergencies. Investigators never confirmed either explanation. Records conflict regarding the wing's original specialized purpose. Nora overheard two senior nurses quietly discussing earlier patient transfers. They reportedly mentioned individuals moved suddenly without standard discharge procedures. When Nora asked about those comments, the conversation ended. She documented the moment only as incomplete testimony. Jacob reviewed archived maintenance blueprints showing hidden access panels behind several walls. Those panels did not appear on modern renovation plans. He requested clarification from engineering consultants who could not locate matching documentation. Jacob stored the blueprints in his personal records. Clara Cross referenced admission numbers and discovered several duplicated patient identifiers. Each duplicate pointed to different outcome categories. Investigators later noted that such duplication should have been impossible under system controls. The hospital attributed it to legacy software overlap. The first external audit occurred after a patient family requested a transfer history explanation. Their relatives' file listed treatment locations that no longer matched existing departments. Hospital representatives provided a simplified summary without addressing those discrepancies. The family reportedly accepted the explanation without further complaint. Nora later encountered a locked supply cart positioned in the unused hallway. Inventory tags showed recent stocking dates. No department claimed responsibility for the cart. It disappeared from the hallway 2 days later. Jacob noticed that security cameras covering the East Wing sometimes restarted without logged maintenance events. Video gaps appeared at irregular intervals. Security staff attributed the issue to routine system refresh cycles. Jacob recorded the times for comparison. Clara discovered one archived memo describing a temporary administrative boundary inside the East Wing. The memo lacked signatures and referenced no follow-up actions. She could not find any related correspondence. Clara labeled it as unresolved internal communication. Local reporters requested public floor access information during a general hospital transparency review. The East Wing was briefly omitted from the published summary. Afterward, a corrected version included the wing without explanation. No public statement addressed the revision. Nora was assigned a patient transfer route that briefly passed through the unused hallway. She described the corridor as unusually quiet compared to the rest of the hospital. Her patient asked why that area felt different. Nora answered only that renovations were ongoing. Jacob compared vibration readings from different building sections and found subtle anomalies near the East Wing foundations. The differences were small but consistent across multiple days. Engineering consultants reportedly dismissed them as environmental noise. Jacob did not fully agree with that assessment. Clara located a discharge record listing a recovery room that no longer appeared on any map version. The patient outcome field was blank. She searched for related nursing notes and found none. The file ended without conclusion. Some locals claim the hospital quietly removed a section of the wing years earlier. Others insisted no demolition ever occurred. Investigators never confirmed physical removal of any rooms. Records conflict about spatial measurements. Nora began tracking how often staff unconsciously avoided that hallway. She noticed nurses often rerouted carts even when the path was shorter. No one openly acknowledged the behavior. It simply continued. Jacob requested updated architectural scans and received incomplete layered images. Several interior wall lines did not align between versions. He asked for clarification and received no formal response. Jacob archived the scans alongside earlier blueprints. Clara compared patient census numbers with available bed counts and found repeated discrepancies. The totals exceeded physical capacity on multiple dates. Administrators attributed the issue to clerical rounding. The explanation did not address every mismatch. A small renovation project was later announced for the East Wing. Workers sealed off the hallway for several weeks. After reopening, the layout appeared unchanged. Only the door labels had been updated. Nora noticed that room numbers now skipped from 8 to 13. She asked a supervisor about the missing numbers. The supervisor reportedly said they were never assigned. Nora knew that statement conflicted with earlier charts. Jacob inspected the renovation reports and found no reference to structural modification. The work listed only cosmetic updates and safety compliance checks. No explanation addressed the numbering change. Jacob added the report to his growing file. Clara found that all references to the missing room numbers had vanished from the digital archive. Even previously saved file links now redirected to general folders. She verified that no deletion logs were present. The absence itself became part of her documentation. Investigators from a regional health board later conducted a limited compliance review. Their summary described the East Wing as fully operational and within regulation. They did not reference any historical inconsistencies. The review closed without recommendation. Nora transferred to another hospital 2 months later. She stated that the East Wing remained the only area she never felt comfortable discussing. Her final report contained no personal conclusions. Only observations and times remained. Jacob continued working at the facility and quietly maintained his private archive. He never submitted the full collection to administration. He reportedly believed the system would not accept it. Jacob still checks the hallway during routine inspections. Clara completed her contract and moved into a different records department. She kept copies of several unresolved files. She never claimed they proved wrongdoing. She only said they never matched each other. Today, the hospital's East Wing appears ordinary to visitors. Patients pass the hallway without noticing anything unusual. Staff continue daily routines without comment. Official maps remain unchanged. Some locals claimed the wing once held information that could not be fully reconciled. Investigators never confirmed any concealed activity or deliberate removal. Records conflict, documentation shifts, and responsibility remains unclear. The hallway still exists, quietly waiting for consistent explanation. Locals warned about this coastal bridge for years. Residents in a quiet Oregon coastal town kept repeating the same warning, although visiting drivers usually laughed it away. They said the bridge looked ordinary, yet accidents followed patterns nobody could comfortably explain. Most people dismissed those stories until records began quietly contradicting every confident explanation. The bridge crossed a narrow inlet near Newport, Oregon, carrying commuters, tourists, and freight trucks between shifting tidal marshes. It was built in the 1970s, reinforced again in 2011 after corrosion damaged interior supports. State records described it as structurally sound, although archived notes mentioned recurring inspection disputes. County file from 2009 documented 3 unrelated vehicle losses during clear weather. Mark Henson was 34, a delivery contractor, driving nightly seafood shipments toward inland distributors across that crossing. He believed the stories were exaggerations created by bored residents watching traffic from nearby cafes. Mark only wanted consistent income and predictable routes, not local legends wrapped around simple steel beams. His dispatch logs later placed him on the bridge shortly after 10:41 that evening. Erin Wallace, 29, worked as a marine biology graduate assistant collecting water samples beneath the same structure. She often heard tires echo above her boat, sometimes followed by sudden braking and confused horns. Erin reported those sounds to harbor staff, who told her traffic always behaves strangely near changing tides. She recorded her observations inside a waterproof notebook marked with times and weather conditions. The third witness was Leonard Pike, 61, a retired surveyor photographing shoreline erosion for a volunteer conservation group. Leonard spent hours watching shadows slide across concrete pillars while measuring small shoreline collapses. He said drivers frequently slowed at the center span, even when no vehicles blocked their path. Investigators later noted Leonard's timing aligned with multiple unexplained traffic reports. Locals claimed fog caused the confusion, yet many incidents occurred under clear afternoon skies with high visibility. Some residents blamed salt corrosion, while others insisted hidden currents vibrated the bridge from below. Investigators never confirmed either explanation, although records conflict about vibration sensor accuracy. Archive notes mentioned repeated recalibrations that never fully stabilized measurement results. Mark first noticed the pattern during his third delivery week when his steering wheel briefly pulled left. He corrected easily, but the sensation lingered longer than any pothole or crosswind he remembered. Mark told coworkers who joked about ghost tides and magnetic sandbars beneath the pavement. He stopped mentioning it after laughter replaced practical discussion. Erin experienced something different while anchoring beneath the central span during low-tide surveys. She felt subtle pressure waves moving against her hull without visible surface disturbance. Her instruments showed normal readings, yet the boat drifted sideways in slow, controlled motion. She wrote that the movement felt deliberate, though she avoided assigning intention. Leonard reviewed historical maps showing repeated shoreline adjustments near the bridge foundations. Older charts from 2003 showed underwater contours that no longer matched modern sonar imaging. He reported those discrepancies to county engineers, who reportedly thanked him without following further. Leonard kept his own comparison files inside a sealed binder. The first serious accident occurred during early summer when a tourist van scraped the guardrail without braking. Passengers said the driver suddenly felt disoriented, though toxicology tests returned completely normal. The vehicle stopped inches from the drop, and everyone walked away physically unharmed. Dispatch logs recorded the driver repeating that the road briefly felt unfamiliar. State inspectors reviewed the site again, issuing another statement confirming compliance with safety standards. They replaced reflective markers and added additional lighting along the midspan. Local newspapers printed reassuring headlines, while online comments remained quietly skeptical. Some locals claimed the changes only made the bridge feel more unsettling. Mark crossed the bridge later that week during a light coastal drizzle. He reported a sensation like slowed time while the surrounding scenery continued normally. His dashboard camera showed no visual distortion, only a slight steering correction near the center. Mark finished his route without further problems, yet could not forget the moment. Erin reviewed her notes that evening, realizing several boat drift events matched Mark's crossing times. She contacted harbor administration with those correlations, although officials reportedly found no actionable conclusions. Her archived notes now contained overlapping times, tide levels, and unexplained lateral movements. She labeled the page as preliminary coincidence, not evidence. Leonard compared Erin's timing with his erosion measurements and noticed identical intervals between irregular shoreline collapses. The spacing suggested a repeating underwater shift occurring every several days. He shared his findings with a coastal geologist who advised cautious interpretation. Records conflict regarding whether that consultation continued afterward. The second accident involved a small pickup that slowly drifted into the opposing lane without visible steering input. The driver insisted his hands remain steady on the wheel, although investigators never confirmed mechanical failure. Witnesses described the truck moving as if guided, not pushed. No injuries occurred, yet the report unsettled everyone who read it. Local forums began collecting personal accounts, many describing the same directional pull near the center span. Some locals claimed the bridge reacted to tides, while others blamed unseen foundation settling. Engineers stated both theories lacked sufficient supporting measurements. Still, the comments continued appearing with disturbing consistency. Mark considered requesting a new route, but reliable coastal work paid better than inland alternatives. He promised himself he would stay alert and document anything unusual. His next crossing occurred just before sunrise, with light fog hugging the water. That trip ended with his truck safely parked, yet his hands shook afterward. Erin reviewed sonar scans showing faint underwater displacement near one primary support column. The movement was small, but it repeated across multiple scans taken days apart. She forwarded those files to her academic supervisor, who suggested further sampling before conclusions. Erin saved backups on 2 separate storage devices. Leonard returned to the shoreline during a storm surge and watched water wrap around the pillars differently than before. He noted changing flow angles that did not match previous tidal models. Leonard wrote that the bridge appeared to influence currents rather than merely resisting them. His notes ended with a cautious recommendation for deeper analysis. The third accident finally forced temporary closure after a sedan struck the barrier and lost a tire. The driver claimed the road surface briefly appeared narrower than usual. Investigators never confirmed visual distortion, yet archived notes recorded similar language from prior drivers. County officials ordered additional underwater inspections. Those inspections reportedly found minor foundation shifts, though not enough to explain repeated driver behavior. Engineers reinforced the affected section and reopened the bridge weeks later. New statements emphasized safety, stability, and ongoing monitoring. Local conversations, however, remained uneasy. Mark resumed his route and noticed the pulling sensation had slightly weakened. He still corrected his steering near the same midpoint location. Mark later told coworkers the bridge felt calmer, though not entirely normal. Dispatch logs recorded no further incidents from his vehicle. Erin continued her sampling and found the unusual drift patterns gradually decreasing over time. She wrote that the water now behaved closer to expected tidal models. Her final notebook entry suggested the structure might have subtly shifted back into alignment. She avoided speculating on what caused the earlier movements. Leonard reviewed his shoreline photographs months later and confirmed erosion patterns had stabilized. He concluded the coastline had reached a temporary equilibrium after prolonged disturbance. Leonard never publicly explained what he believed caused that earlier instability. He only said the bridge would always deserve careful watching. Today, the bridge remains open, carrying thousands of vehicles each month without major incidents. Tourists still photograph sunsets from nearby overlooks, unaware of the old warnings. State records list the structure as compliant, monitored, and unremarkable. Yet locals continue watching every car across the center span. Some locals claimed the danger passed, while others insisted it merely learned to hide. Investigators never confirmed any unusual forces, despite conflicting archived measurements and eyewitness accounts. Records conflict, memories fade, and explanations remain carefully incomplete. The bridge stands quietly, holding its secrets beneath steady coastal tides. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Old Man Stories. I'm aware that many of you use these videos to fall asleep. So before you doze off, I thought it would be a fun idea if each of you could leave a comment letting me know which part of the world you're listening from. Also, give a like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the episodes. Okay, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. This abandoned room was a warning. An abandoned room inside a municipal building in Topeka, Kansas, was discovered during routine maintenance, yet the conditions unsettled staff because documentation did not match reality. The space appeared sealed and forgotten. However, several indicators suggested continuity rather than neglect, which created tension among those responsible for oversight. That contradiction initiated a careful internal review conducted quietly to prevent speculation while preserving accurate records. Jordan Ellis, age 32, worked as a facilities coordinator responsible for tracking maintenance schedules across several city-owned properties and auxiliary service offices. Renee Calder, age 26, served as an administrative assistant assigned to digitize archive notes and update room inventories for annual compliance reporting. Their shared objective involved confirming that every listed space aligned with dispatch logs and inspection documentation required for external audit. The building housed multiple departments and included storage corridors that had not been actively used since restructuring reduced staff numbers years earlier. State records listed every room as cataloged with assigned purpose following an inspection completed in 2011. Those records did not explain why one door behind a filing corridor lacked identification placard while appearing structurally identical to occupied offices. Jordan noticed the discrepancy while conducting a floor-by-floor walkthrough intended to confirm insurance documentation before renewal review. The door opened without resistance and revealed a compact office containing metal desk, outdated office chair, and wall calendar frozen on the current month. He documented the scene with photographs and noted uncertainty because the corridor electrical circuit was listed as inactive within facilities diagrams. Renee reviewed digital access logs and confirmed that no authorized keycard entries were recorded for that door during the previous 6 months. She located older archived notes referencing temporary use of the room during a records overflow period more than a decade earlier. Records conflict regarding when the room was officially removed from active use because closure documentation appeared incomplete and unsigned within archived files. Jordan inspected the electrical panels serving that hallway and confirmed that breaker labeling indicated no power should reach that outlet according to maintenance diagrams. An electrician later verified that the circuit was receiving low-level current through a secondary line that had not been updated during earlier renovations. Investigators never confirmed whether that configuration resulted from oversight or intentional routing left undocumented during infrastructure upgrades. The desk held a powered digital clock displaying the correct time and a stack of printed schedules dated within the past 2 weeks. Renee verified that the format matched an older template still accessible on a shared archival drive used for historical reference. She documented that any employee with internal access could reproduce the documents without indicating actual occupancy within the room. Jordan requested a review of custodial logs and discovered that cleaning staff had not recorded service to that room for more than a year. Dispatch logs showed no work orders related to the door lock or lighting fixtures within that corridor. Investigators never confirmed whether dust patterns indicated recent presence because airflow from ventilation ducts produced uneven accumulation across similar rooms. A security supervisor reviewed camera footage covering the hallway and reported that the existing camera angle did not directly capture the doorway. He confirmed that adjacent footage showed no unusual movement patterns during the previous month based on available recordings. Records conflict regarding whether camera placement had been modified during past upgrades because older installation diagrams were missing from the equipment file. Renee compiled a packet containing photographs, access logs, archived notes, and infrastructure diagrams for review by the facilities manager. She avoided interpretive language and emphasized that the concern involved documentation inconsistency rather than confirmed misuse or unauthorized access. The manager acknowledged the thoroughness of her work and authorized a broader audit of underutilized spaces across the building. During that audit, several additional rooms were identified with outdated labels and incomplete records, though none displayed similar electrical inconsistencies. The review revealed that prior renovation efforts focused on public-facing areas, while back offices received limited documentation updates. That discovery reframed the abandoned room as evidence of systemic record neglect rather than an isolated anomaly. Jordan coordinated with contractors to update wiring diagrams and verify that all inactive circuits were correctly disconnected according to current safety standards. Renee assisted by updating digital inventories so that every room carried a documented purpose or formal inactive status within the database. Their combined efforts produced a revised compliance report that satisfied external reviewers during the following inspection cycle. Several employees privately described the room as unsettling, even after explanations were provided through internal communication channels. Some stated that the discovery felt like a reminder that oversight can persist unnoticed, while others interpreted it as a warning about complacency. Those reactions appeared in informal conversation rather than in any official documentation submitted for review. Supervisors incorporated the case into training materials for new administrative and facilities staff across multiple departments. The lesson emphasized that undocumented spaces often indicate process failure rather than hidden activity or intentional misuse. Archived notes from that session describe the room as an example of how neglecting documentation can generate fear disproportionate to actual risk. Months later, the facilities department conducted a secondary review to confirm that corrective actions remained effective across the entire property. Updated inventories matched physical walkthroughs, and every corridor displayed clear signage and accurate diagrams